A mihi nui, kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Kathy Bunting toka ingoa. Welcome. It's exciting to be with you today to share a story about a Year 9 science unit where students explored possibilities around life on Mars. This unit was part of a study that a group of us are involved with. This project is funded by the Teaching and Learning Research Initiative. Here's an image of our group. It's a pretty amazing combination of teachers and researchers. And now I'd like to introduce you to Richie.
Kia ora koutou, kia ora Kathy. My name is Richie Miller. I'm really glad to be here today speaking. I'm a high school teacher at Newlands College in Wellington. And back at the end of last year, I was lucky enough to be contacted by one of the researchers on the Teaching and Learning Research Initiative project. And they wanted to see if I wanted to get involved with this really cool idea, which is where I met Kathy. At the beginning, the brief for me was to use an online citizen science project within my teaching of a topic, a science topic. And quite honestly, at the beginning, I had no idea what an online citizen science project actually was. So if you don't know yourselves, then all it is projects that are created by scientists, and they can be all around the world, and they want you, the general public, and students as well as the general public, to get involved in helping them answer current real science questions using data that they're harvesting or data that you might be harvesting as an individual as well. So that could be looking at classifying things, it could be looking at data, it could be collecting data to upload yourself, it could be all these different things that are giving scientists observations and the person power to gather as much information or to analyze as much information as possible to make their jobs a lot quicker to be able to answer real science questions. What I did was found a really cool online citizen science project called Planet 4. And so I decided to put this into my space topic. So this online citizen science project, Planet 4, it was a project by space scientists. They were looking at images, and are looking at images right now, of the surface of Mars. So these images are getting taken all the time by the high-rise camera on board Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and which is a spacecraft orbiting Mars, and they are taking these images and they're trying to look at specific features. In fact, they're trying to look at these carbon dioxide vents that are blowing off on the surface of Mars, and looking to see how the wind are creating these fan shapes. As you go in here, you can get tools to then go and use to try and circle or classify different features to see if you can spot these geysers, whether they're blotches where they've gone shot up straight in the air, or whether they are a fan shape and they've been blown by wind. And they can tell a lot of things by the different shapes at the different times of years that are being formed, and a lot about the weather that's going on the surface of Mars. So I thought to myself, when I saw this, I thought, surface of Mars, explosions, fantastic. This is going to work well with science kids in Year 9. So when I decided to use it, I had a look at my unit plan, and I thought, okay, let's try and make a challenge out of this. Let's try and fit this online citizen science project somewhere in the middle and try to build up towards it. So I challenged the students to say whether or not they thought that humans could, I've got this t-shirt on, with your structure and your physiology, if you could survive on the surface of Mars. And our task was to go out and try and find evidence as to whether or not we thought that could happen.
So Richie, you'd chosen an online citizen science project that connected with the space topic that you were planning for the term, but it also had a huge influence on how you planned your unit. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So yes, absolutely. I did want to focus for the curriculum on the students' ability to use evidence when supporting their ideas. So that was the science capability that I was framing the unit around. And the nature of science strand, that would involve asking questions, finding evidence, making models, and using investigations to get simple explanations. And this was all in the backdrop of the challenge of the students to see if humans can live on Mars. So um, do that, I actually got the kids at the very beginning to start up an online diary. This was to try and get them in the habit of writing down their conclusions at the end of each of the science activities that they were doing, whether it was modelling or whether it was an investigation, and really try to get their own observations as a part of their evidence that they could present at the very end in terms of whether they still thought that humans could or could not live on Mars. So it was a challenge to see if their viewpoint would change over that timeline. From the word go, as we look through the unit plan itself in terms of the unit sections, it became apparent that the Planet 4 project was an excellent anchor point near the end of the unit to really allow a series of learning events to lead up to it. The first part of the unit was to just get a general scale of space. So going from the scale of Newlands College and how big it was all the way through to the solar system and to the universe. And to get that scale of where Mars sat within all this, we did a short model of blowing up some balloons, giving an astronomical units of how far the astronomical units of how far away the different planets were from the sun, converting that to a centimeter scale, and then putting that into that scale in the classroom, just to see the relative distances between Earth and the sun and Mars and the sun, just to ask the question, is this such a great idea to be trying to get that far to Mars when it's quite a different distance away from the sun than Earth is, and what the implications of that is. Following on from that, we wanted to really start to hone in on Mars. So what are the conditions on Mars and how does it affect the human body? We were going to have a look at the different features in terms of surface features and also the atmosphere, and just to relate them to Earth. What is the same? What is different? And whether or not these are going to be big issues when it comes to living there. So the first feature that was really apparent when you look at Mars and you look at Earth is these features on the surface that are familiar to us, yet there's a huge frequency number of them on Mars, which are craters. And so we decided to do a crater investigation, or really a meteorite investigation. And I'll just jump to their document that they got for this task. Their challenge was to see what kind of meteorite had made a crater that had been found by Mr. Miller on the surface of Newlands College. In fact, it was just cocoa and flour that I had made this crater, and I'd given them the diameter and the depth of this crater, and they had to go and investigate what meteorite managed to create this. So they got given different resources. They got given putty, different weights, marbles, and they could drop it from different heights into these surfaces of flour. Moving on from that, we continued with this idea of modeling different surface features to really lead towards the Planet 4 project. So the next modeling event was the actual carbon dioxide vents that were blowing up on the surface of Mars, these geysers, carbon dioxide geysers. So what we did was, first of all, we modeled them just using the old school camera film capsules that you can clip shut, and we put the soda powder and vinegar together to get some carbon dioxide being formed, and so it would build up and it would pop the lid off and it would hit the ceiling. We then tried a bigger scale model with the whole class, which was to get the same ingredients and put some colouring in there and put some glitter in there to be the dirt of the surface of Mars, and then get the students to hold a hairdryer to show that blowing all the products away was going to form this beautiful fan shape, and we could relate that to the images that we were going to see when we actually went on to Planet 4. We then jumped onto Planet 4 itself, and they were handed another online document. So this time it was Planet 4 helping space scientists. And they were given a brief of what they were looking for and what the scientists needed help for. Then they went on and they just had a look and started classifying these different images, different surface features on Mars. And so there was two projects. In fact, there's one on geysers, and there's actually one on other land features, such as these spiders and Swiss cheese features or shapes that are formed on the surface of Mars for various reasons. And so they went on and they were asked to just be reflective about their experience in terms of what interested them. Of course, they were part of this project. Why was we talked about why the scientists needed their help, and we went through the science of how these geysers formed, but actually what was it about this experience that made them want to know some more? Is there any types of images that really got their imagination going? Or were there any questions that spawned from seeing such images that were kind of similar? To top that off, we just had a most amazing experience with being able to communicate with the project itself. So now online citizen science projects often have lines of communication. They're not just a front-end screen that you are just putting your information into, but often you can contact the scientist directly. It's such a much more personal experience when you can do that, because you have much more connection then. And so there was a bunch of different email addresses that and it was suggested to me by one of the people on the research team, why don't you just chuck out some emails out there and maybe you'll get someone that might come and speak to your class. And so I did that, and albeit they were on the other side of the planet, we got the lead scientist from Queen's University in Belfast to Zoom call us, her time 10:30 at night, our time just after 9 in the morning. And we got amazing information from her and question answer about all these different features and what they mean and how important they are to her research and the team's research across the world. So that was a fantastic finish to that whole project.
Seems so clearly a rich range of learning experiences through this unit, Richie, and I loved what you said about using Planet 4 as an anchor for these. Certainly seems that the choice of online citizen project that you made guided what else you would do. And you clearly had a focus on supporting students to collect and use evidence in relation to the overarching question, can humans live on Mars? What ways did you assess students' learning through the unit, and how did these tasks support the students to think about collecting and using evidence?
So assessing the unit was actually quite tricky. They had this online diary throughout the unit, but putting that information had ended up being accumulated in a haphazard way, and it wasn't quite enough information for them to be assessed on, essentially. So I wanted to consolidate their writing somehow, and I was lucky enough to, at a professional learning event, have a discussion with one of their English teachers, and it was hard to gauge where their initially hard to gauge where their writing was at, because they'd just come out of this experience of just being into high school year 9 and then straight into lockdown for 7 weeks. And then they'd had the online learning experience and they were straight out again. So it was tricky for them. It's tricky for the teacher to just see where they were at with their writing. Did turn out, however, that they were just learning at the same time this idea of breaking up paragraphs into different parts to make it easier. So like topic statement, explanation, and example. And I was going to use that in tandem to base my assessment structure of the format of the assessment for the students. So having a look at that, there was a very similar idea of that structure. So they had a statement, basically what was one of their statements to say whether you could or could not live on Mars? What is the evidence that they'd harvested from their observations from class or reliable sources that they'd managed to get information from? And then what was the impact on those humans trying to live on Mars, and decide whether or not that this was going to change their original theory of whether or not humans could live on Mars one day. And lastly, they were asked to also rank their statements in terms of how important or how big an impact they would have on that judgment. So basically getting that evaluation in there as well to see how well they could compare different lines of evidence.
I really like the way you collaborated with an English teacher colleague on this, Richie. And it seems that because of these discussions, students were able to use a really clear writing scaffold to help them structure and present their ideas. I wonder if you could now just take a step back and think about the unit overall, as well as students' responses through the unit and to the assessment task. I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you think worked really well, and perhaps some of the things you might change if you were to do the unit again?
Yeah, the experience on a whole had a bunch of different reflections that or a bunch of different ideas that came from it. I think first and foremost, the online citizen science projects can be used in a number of different ways. So first of all, they are just really good hooks. If you just want to get students interested in a topic, you can jump onto one of these. It'll be relevant, it'll be current, it'll be interesting, and it'll be participatory. However, they can be short-lived as well. So I think much better than that is to use them as a real innovative anchor for a project or a unit. So precipitate in a whole series of learning events that will lead up and take a journey towards one of these online citizen science projects, so that they get an investment into really wanting to be a part of this project, that they are really engaged with the purpose of the project as well. I think on top of that, it was really interesting how that if you do it in that way and you've got an open question such as can we live on Mars, is that it's sort of the online citizen science projects can bounce off of the nature of science strands as you charge towards the online citizen science project through all these learning events, and you get there. It can also reflect back on the nature of science by getting the kids to ask more questions, to want to communicate with the people and the scientists behind the projects. It's really precipitate. It's really getting those kids to go from just being passive to being action towards wanting to ask questions and to get answers. So one part that I didn't explore as much as maybe could have is to get the kids to be looking at all the different communication pathways on these websites, whether it's blogs or email addresses, and just getting them to send out messages to these scientists to ask them questions straight up. I also think that this idea of using evidence is a really important part, and the online citizen science project Planet 4 was just a branch of that evidence, using one of these online citizen science projects allowed me to set up a series of activities that gave students opportunities to harvest their own observations, their own evidence. It's a real minefield out there for students to be at the mercy of the entire internet to go and harvest their information from, and that can be overwhelming. And I think students even at the ages of year 13 can find that really intimidating to try and use information to justify their statements that they're making in science. So if that can be made easier by really honing in on different in-class activities that end with something like this Planet 4, where you can get that evidence from that platform, then you sort of take the onus away from having to be in that never-ending sphere of the internet. So that is really interesting as well.
Richie, I really want to acknowledge the thoughtful way that you planned and executed this unit with your students. Several of our research team really enjoyed the time that they had with you in class, and it was very apparent that your students were engaged and loving their learning. I want to finish this session just with a quick nod to the Science Learning Hub, which as a result of this particular project and an earlier one funded by the Teaching and Learning Research Initiative, developed a specific section called Citizen Science. In this section, we've collated some planning tips from teachers like Richie, highlighting things to think about, including whether the online citizen science project is ongoing. And we note, unfortunately, that Planet 4 has recently finished, although scientists are working towards uploading more data. We've also profiled citizen science projects. This collection will continue to grow. Our aim here is to help you get a head start with your planning. So we've drawn together some background information, possible curriculum links, some suggestions for learning objectives, even additional resources. Citizen science projects are growing in popularity here in Aotearoa and around the world. They offer really rich opportunities for students to engage in real science projects, contributing to something that is bigger than themselves and learning more about the nature of science in the process. Richie and I hope that his experience of using Planet 4 to create an engaging space unit will inspire you in your teaching as you look for ways to make school science relevant, engaging, and meaningful for your students. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for being part of the journey of learning science in Aotearoa.